Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And today's I'm going to do a video about a band that probably a fair amount of people maybe know by now because their material's been floating around in bootlegs for quite a while. And that's the Flying Hat Band. And their connection to Judas Priest makes them have a little higher profile than a lot of these bands would have. And Flying Hat Band existed from 1971 to 1974. They supported Deep Purple on tour, so they definitely got exposed in the UK. So there's probably a lot more people in the UK that know about this band than perhaps the US. And they're from Birmingham, the same town that Black Sabbath came from. So they definitely are one of the coolest heavy bands of that period, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of former members of the band. Uh, Glenn Tipton, of course, ended up getting recruited to join Judas Priest, which was a competitive band in Birmingham at that time. Flying Hat Band and Judas Priest were considered two of the top bands in that area once Black Sabbath became more of a national, international act. But the bunch of people that used to be in the band are Trevor Foster on drums, Andy Wheeler on bass, Frank Walker was another bass player, Pete Hughes was a vocalist in the band for a while, and Dave Shelton was a bass player in the band for a while. And a lot of those members came from Glenn Tipton's earlier bands, Merlin, and another band called Shave 'Em Dry, which I think is an awesome band name. Um, but the final lineup was Glenn Tipton on vocals and guitar, Pete Cowling on bass, and Steve Palmer on drums. And Steve Palmer is the brother of Carl Palmer, who we all know from Emerson, Lake and Palmer and so many other great bands. And Pete Cowling ended up moving on after the Flying Hat Band and joined Pat Travers. And so in this case, unlike some of these obscure bands, we actually kind of know where some of these people went. And then, of course, Glenn Tipton um, fronted the band. So great, great power trio. And they did a demo, and that's what's floating around out there. It's posted on YouTube, so I'm going to post it below. And anybody who likes early heavy proto metal rock is going to love this. And Judas Priest fans probably already know about it. But it was a 4-song demo: Seventh Plane, Coming of the Lords, Reaching for the Stars, and Lost Time. And one of the songs on it's a little more low key with some chanting and some drum work that's a little different than the other 3 songs, which are all just classic proto metal, seriously heavy. Glenn Tipton, as it turns out, is a pretty decent vocalist. But as far as early heavy rock bands in the UK, Flying Hat Band is really up there with them, and it's really too bad they didn't issue an album in their own time. As it turns out, they signed to Vertigo in 1973, and word has it that they recorded a whole album. And it's hard for me to believe that here we are 50 years later, and there's a Vertigo album in the can that hasn't been released. So I have a little bit of skepticism about whether they recorded a whole album for Vertigo. But if they did, and it's from 1973 with the Power Trio lineup, it's got to be killer. And it kind of reminds me of the fact that Necromandus, I did a video on them as well. Another great early UK heavy band produced by Tony Iommi, and they got signed to Vertigo as well. But at least with them, the Vertigo material is now available, and it's a killer studio album, and it's right around the same time. And the reasons for Vertigo not releasing Necromandus were because they felt like they already had Black Sabbath and they didn't necessarily need more heavy bands. But that seems kind of odd because Flying Hat Band certainly has a lot more in common with Black Sabbath than Necromandus in a lot of ways. But Vertigo signed them, and I really am not sure why Vertigo would not have released a whole album by Flying Hat Band. Um, I guess they, once again, maybe assumed that they already had Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath was having a lot of success by them. And I think the Necromandus album was from '72. and this would have been 1973. So my theory is that Black Sabbath is doing so well for Vertigo in 1973 that they ended up being more interested in other heavy bands. Although if you look at the Vertigo roster, there's quite a lot of variety and a lot of progressive bands and a lot of bands doing a lot of interesting stuff, but not necessarily a whole lot of super heavy bands. But anyway, Flying Hat Band, I'd love for a whole album from 1973 to come out. The 4 tracks we have from the demo are killer. Um, and once again, as I often say about bands, they check all the boxes. They're firing on all pistons. Steve Palmer is a killer drummer. Pete Cowling is a top-notch bass player, and Glenn Tipton. It's great to hear him just by himself, outside of the dual guitar work of Judas Priest, because he's an exceptional guitar player. And it turns out he's a pretty good writer and a pretty good singer as well. And the arrangements on their demo are interesting and complex, with lots of room for great guitar work and a lot of interesting shifting changes. And in that sense, they kind of remind me of Black Sabbath as well. And so, not surprising. Of course, that final lineup of Flying Hat Band would have been working on their material within the success of Black Sabbath's first 4 albums at least. And so that emulation isn't surprising. But anyway, I'm sure a lot of you people have already heard the Flying Hat Band. Those of you who haven't, if you're a proto metal fan, you like early British heavy rock, you like Black Sabbath, you like Judas Priest, and you haven't heard this, you're in for a total treat. Check them out. Flying Hat Band. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.